What's going on, everybody? Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and whatever time it is. Welcome back to yet another video with you, man, Immersioholic, and ladies and gentlemen, welcome to yet another faction overview for the Divide Et Impera overhaul mod for Total War Rome 2. And today, everybody, we finally have Galatia on the channel. That's right, we haven't done a faction overview for these bad boys, the Chads of the East, just yet. Now it is finally time. They've received some major changes in the 1.3 era of updates, as have all of the barbarians, so this could be really interesting. If you've played Galatia in the past, it may be time for you to finally come back and jump on in and check them out, because their roster is very different, and it's a very different experience in my opinion. Alright everyone, well, let's jump into your cultural buffs and debuffs, and then we'll jump into the campaign overview section of this video. First off, you of course belong to the Galli, aka the Gallic cultural group. You share this with the Scordisci, the Boii, the Nervii, obviously yourself, and then the Averni. You share the following two buffs with those factions. You get the Gallic horsemanship buff, which gives you +1 experience rank for Gallic cavalry recruits. Really nice buff to have. Very helpful, especially considering you're a chieftain, so you get another experience on top of that. Basically, you get 2 XP ranks per cav unit, as long as it's a Gallic cavalry unit. You then have the Druidic cultural buff, which increases population from temples when culture is dominant. So you may want to really focus on increasing your culture, and especially as Galatia, you're going to have to try and do that quickly. But the buffs and debuffs for Galatia specifically are the following. You have the Price of Freedom buff, which increases your captive's income. Helpful. You then get the Plunderers buff, which increases income from raiding and sacking. Also very helpful, because you actually will need to do quite a bit of that as Galatia. And then you have the Hindered Development debuff, and this is a bit of a tough one. You get increased construction times. I've never seen a debuff like this before, where it forces you to have to go through extra turns in order to finish a building, and it does hurt you in the early game. Later on doesn't matter as much, but early game you're definitely going to feel it, and we'll talk about why I went through it in the campaign. So ladies and gentlemen, I shall see you on the campaign map. Alrighty everyone, welcome to the part 1 section of this video. Now it's time to check out the campaign situation for the Galatians, and here, as you can see, we have our settlement, the settlement of Ankara, aka Ankara. Ankara, I'll kind of use them interchangeably, by the way. This city, Ankara, is your only city. That's right, you are a, drumroll please, a one-hitter-quitter faction. You lose Ankara, before you can get another settlement, you are out of the game. GG's done, you're over. At least if you can't take another settlement quickly. You do have the capital of a province, the province of Galatia et Cappadocia. Galatia and Cappadocia. So obviously this is going to include Galatia, Galatia proper, which is pretty much the highlands up here. And then you have the city of Side down here to your southwest, owned by the Egyptians. Massacre, opened by the Cappadocians. And then you have the city of Iconium, owned by Lydia. Lydia being a very powerful faction indeed. You have only one army, the Headhunters. It is a very small army, starts inside of your capital. 2 sets of cavalry, including your general's bodyguard, a low-tier spear, and then skirmisher unit. And it is led by your general named, what was it? Magurix, that's right. Magurix, he is 27 years old, I believe. Yes, he is 27 years old. He has a 6-year-old son who's on the way up, but I mean, 6 years, he's still got quite a while till he can lead an army. And then your wife, Melina, is 24 years old. You are both relatively happy and still relatively young, although perhaps not in ancient times comparison. You also start off as a chieftain. Interesting choice being a chieftain, and to be honest, I would keep it for quite a while, because getting this +1 experience rank for all recruitment in all of your provinces is really nice. Everywhere you go, your units will have some experience when you recruit them. Definitely going to be a big buff for you. The -5 loyalty sucks, but it's only -5, so you should be able to handle it. And then the +5 upkeep for all armies, not ideal, but you're not going to have that many armies anyway, at least not until the mid-game. So I think your political situation overall is actually quite stable. It depends on what sort of traits you get with the other political parties, obviously, which is a coin toss every time you start a campaign. But that is how we start off. So let's go to our diplomacy. You are a Gallic barbarian culture surrounded by Easterners, so you don't really have any friends. You have Bithynia up here to the northwest, which is a Dacian Thracian tribe. You do have trade and non-aggression with them,
I am here
but
to
that's
listen.
it. You don't have any military access, alliance, or anything like that. And then the Cappadocians down here at Patuca, I believe it's supposed to be like Kingdom of Cappadocia or something like that. Or maybe just Cappadocia or Southeast Cappadocia, whatever. I'm going to call them Cappadocians. These guys are technically Hellenic though, and you do have trade with them, no non-aggression, and they actually don't like you. Almost everybody doesn't like you except this one barbarian faction, but that's back across the Hellespont in Thrace. That's not really relevant to your campaign. You do have same blood as them, so you might want to confederate if they start to get destroyed, but that is all the way over here. I believe they own this city up here, if I'm correct. So that is that. Diplomacy is not starting off very well. Even though you do have non-aggression with Bithynia, I would still expect them to be hostile to you. In all of my campaigns where I tested the Galatians, they break off trade with you very, very early on. It doesn't take them long at all to be upset with you. Same thing for Cappadocia over here. They don't like you. They'll break off trade, usually within the first 5 to 10 turns. However, you do have one nice thing that goes on for you, and that is because you're surrounded by all of these little single one-hitter-quitter factions, almost literally everywhere except down here to your southwest. Because you're surrounded by all of them, though, they actually hate each other just as much as they hate you, to be honest. So you'll see Cappadocia attack Pontus. You'll also see Sinop attack Pontus, and you'll see Pontus want to go ahead and attack Armenia for whatever reason. Then Bithynia will also try and attack Sinop. It's a little bit of a coin flip on who attacks who, but typically they will all sort of fight each other. So that at least gives you an opening where you can just kind of sit in Ankara, wait for your moment to strike, and then say, like when the Cappadocians have marched their army out and they've, taken some losses, but maybe they beat Pontus or maybe they lose, it is what it is, whatever. Then you take their city. And then all of a sudden you've just made an expansion and Massacre is in your province and you've got yourself some iron. So just something to keep in mind. We'll talk more about tips later on though. But that is your diplomacy. It's very coin flippy. So each campaign can be really, really different. But the overall premise is still the same in that things are going to be very random and very chaotic. This is not a peaceful time for Anatolia. It takes quite a while for things to get peaceful, and funnily enough, it doesn't really happen until you get the Romans coming over and taking over everything and uniting everybody, whether they like it or not. So that's what you have going on. Next thing, population. City of Ankara is pretty small. You have 34,000, which isn't a massive amount. It's not terrible, but this is a capital of a province, so it's expected to be higher. Here's your different social classes and whatnot, population classes, if you will. You do have a decent mixture. Your elites are very minimal though, only at 1,400, and your Gaisate social class, your tier 2s, are only at 4,400, and these guys are the ones where you'll recruit your best core units, like your axemen and your solid medium to high tier swordsmen. So that's going to be a problem. Your Oniak social class, your tier 3, that is very good at 23,500, and that's where you'll recruit like your low tier units, such as where is it? Not these guys. These guys are covering with tier 2, but these spearmen here. These spearmen actually very, very useful for you. So just keep that in mind while you're doing your thing and conquering and whatnot. Another thing to keep in mind about your population is that you have no other barbarian cultures around you. I say barbarian. Is it technically barbarian? Let's just double check. I think it's Celtic. Yeah, Celtic barbarian. Same thing, mate. But yeah, you don't really have any other Hellenic culture. You are the most Eastern Hellenic faction, Celtic faction there is. You go further east, you won't find any more Celts. If you go west, you will find Celts eventually, but it's not until you get up into here where you have your, distant cousins and whatnot. So as you conquer the cities around you, the majority of their population is going to be foreign to you unless you can get dominant culture in your core province and other provinces before you take them over. So you may want to consider just raising those cities to the ground, because the population that is there is going to be pretty much 100% foreign. It's unfortunate, but it is what it is. That's what you get for being the Galatians. The Galatians, of course, being Gauls or Celts who have migrated from the west out here to the east, and this is where you find yourself. Now, speaking of which, your economy is not very good at all, and it's going to take quite a while for it to get good. Thankfully, you do have some iron coming in via trade with the Cappadocians. To your north, you do have some wood at Sinop. However, that is kind of it for resources in Anatolia. Anatolia is pretty barren for resources. Feels kind of strange considering it's supposed to be a very valuable province to have, but I mean, I guess it is what it is. Over here to the west, you do have Ephesus, which will give you a wonder, and then Rhodes also has a wonder as well. So both of those wonders can really help boost your economy, but you got to take to the seas to take over Rhodes, so good luck with that with your terrible navy. But yeah, overall, your economy is going to be really tough. You're not really going to be flowing in trade or anything like that, and you can't even send like a ship out to explore the ocean just to get trade flowing in, at least not until you take over a coastal settlement. So that might make you want to take over Sinop very quickly. It's up to you if you want to try. I instead would focus on just taking as many cities as I can and then converting them to an industry-based economy. Barbarians in general have become more industry-based since the older patches of DEI. Sometimes you can mix it up and go with agriculture as well. It really depends on where you are and who you are. In the Galatians, definitely are tailored more to industry, in my opinion. That and just raiding and sacking and conquering will get you money. Right here, we only have an income of 1,800, but if I send my army over here to the south and I begin raiding, we can throw in sometimes up to another 1,000 to 2,000 on top of that income, just from having an army raiding. So raiding really does actually help you out, especially if you use buffs to increase your raiding output and sacking output. You might want to consider boosting that as well. So do keep all of those in mind. One little small shout out I'll give to some resources is the slave resource, which is up here to your northwest. If you do want to go back across the Hellespont and go back into Europe proper, which is up to you, of course. But yeah, you're not really going to have all that many resources until you get further east out here and then even up into Armenia. So it's going to be more of a mid-game sort of thing. Your early game is going to be focusing on controlling these settlements. Once you get them, chances are your taxes and all that will be doing well enough for you anyway. But yeah, it's definitely not going to be easy for you. You've really got to earn your money when you're playing as the Galatians. Now we're coming up to our next part of the video, which is where I give you guys tips for your overall campaign. I used to really only do this during the verdict, but I want to try and shift this a little bit more to this section of the video. So timestamps will indicate where I'm talking about certain things, so do keep that in mind. A little bit late to tell you now, but I'm sure you guys are all used to it. But anyway, what sort of tips do I have for your Galatian campaign? Well, one really big thing to note is that you can't actually recruit your core good swordsmen and overall units for 12 turns after you start, because you need to research your barrack. It's called the meeting ground. It takes 7 turns to recruit, to construct, which is just absolutely savage. It's really, really tough, on top of 5 turns of technology research being done. So 12 turns in, then you can finally start to recruit those units. But even then, you're only going to be recruiting, I believe it's 3 per 1 turn in this province. Let's check real quick. Yeah. So you can only recruit 3 of any kind of unit at once, which is tough. But I mean, if you're patient, you can make your armies really, really elite. Or you might want to just go ahead, spam your spearmen and cavalry, see what you can get done with what you have. You can always, of course, build the stable, which will give you better cav and chariots. You do get access to chariots. But it's still going to take 7 turns of recruitment just to get you a couple extra units of cav, which you can even get this light cav unit anyway. So I would really focus on trying to recruit heavy infantry faster. That's at least my opinion on that. Outside of that, my next big tip would be to consider a migration campaign. I know I mentioned this quite a lot, And for some factions, it really isn't feasible. Other factions, it certainly is. And for Galatia, it might even be vital to your survival, to be honest. You're in a really, really unfavorable position. You're surrounded by enemies, people that don't like you, people of other cultures. You're not really going to have much diplomacy, so to speak, unless you really earn it, like trying to help someone take on another enemy. You're surrounded by big, chunky factions. You got Lydia down here, which is the closest decent-sized faction, but then you have Egypt right here. Egypt is absolutely a powerhouse. You have the Seleucids right over here. Then you got Armenia over here. Then to the west, you got the Odrysians, which almost always become a very big boy. And then you got the Greeks, so whoever comes out on top there is going to mess you up. And then to your north, you have Archbosphorus, which should be what? Yeah, over here. You got Archbosphorus, which isn't necessarily a juggernaut faction, but it has the potential to become so. And they're quite far away, and their navy is way better than yours, so no matter what direction you expand, you're going up against militaries that are better than yours, factions that have more money, and that are just overall more powerful than you. Even your immediate neighbors, a few of them are stronger than you, like Pontus definitely has a better military than the Galatians. You can go to toe-to-toe with them, but as the game progresses, the Pontic forces get really, really good. You can basically think of it as like fighting Epirus, except a more Anatolian version of Epirus, right? They are Hellenic, but they have their local influence, kind of similar to Epirus. So, yeah, it's going to be a tough one. If you do migrate, I would recommend that you try to go north to either Archbosphorus, as that's always a nice region to take over. Or if you really want to play it safe, go west and go deep into Germanic or Dacian land, sorry. Probably wouldn't go to Illyria. But going up into like Germany and... I mean, you could go all the way back to Gaul. That's a long bloody migration, but like just at least heading over towards like Dacian land where you're bordering some Celtic areas. There is Germans, of course, which is different to your culture, so be aware of that. But getting near more Celtic factions will make it easier for you in the early game if you can put in the time and effort to migrate that far. It's not easy to do, especially as a landlocked faction, which is exactly what you are. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, that's where we're going to end it there for the campaign section of this overview. Now, let's go ahead and jump into the military of Galatia. Alrighty, everybody, here we are at the part 2 section of this video, where we're going to check out the Galatian military. Very quickly, though, I won't bother showing you guys the navy this time, but I will just do a brief little summary of it. In essence, your navy is really, really bad. You only have one of each type of ship. So, for example, you only have one ship with spearmen on it, one ship with swords, one ship with axes, and then one ship with slingers on it. The one nice thing that you do have going, though, is that all of your melee units I just listed on those ships have pretty high stats. And there is 120 men on every single ship except your slinger, which is at 80. So you can't really get very good ships, but you can use that force as a potential really strong amphibious assault force. Just make sure that your navy doesn't fight any other enemy navies. But yeah, that's really, really poor navy. Most of your ships only have 950 HP too, so that's rough. And then, of course, we have to mention your reforms. You are actually based on the Greek Thurios and Thorax reforms. So at turn 50 and turn 120, when those hit, turn 50 for Thurios, Thorax is 120, I believe. You get just 3 units out of those reforms. None of them are really going to make or break your bank too heavily. The main thing that you would get that's quite nice is the Legionary units, the Thorax unit, and then a Thurios Spear unit. So those are nice to have, but you can still operate without them. But, I mean, it's quite nice overall and not too bad at all. But it's not going to unlock a whole new roster of, like, say, mercenary units, such as how the Athenians do. We saw that last week, right? But anyway, let's jump into your land forces for Galatia. So this unit that we've been staring at is your Galatian bodyguard. This is a cavalry unit, only 120 men in it, looking very baller. Nice job, little, what do you call him? Turkey? Whatever. Looking good, mate. This is a melee heavy cav unit. That's kind of it. It's not really used for shock. You can use it for shock with a charge bonus of 50. It's not too terrible. Armor of 38, which is good, but there are others that are better. Melee stats overall are just pretty solid, but it's not very heavy. It's just heavy. You may want to dismount them just so you can use them in melee engagements, although you do have infantry generals as well. But I could see this unit being really helpful for like sieges where you do dismount your general, because those stats are really high for an infantryman. So keep that in mind. But I wanted to show you guys the cavalry unit just because it's the best bodyguard for you to get, in my opinion. Let's jump onto your massive plethora of skirmishers. Just kidding, that's all you get.
Bowman! Orders!
They almost all look the same too.
Battle ready.
Feels bad, man. I almost couldn't tell who was who. We have Galatia Bowman here. Very, very low tier. Nothing at all to say. One of the worst archers I've ever seen in the game. The only thing that isn't the worst is his range, which is 155. I think the lowest range I've seen on a low tier archer is 145, maybe? I'm thinking just off the top of my head, but terrible archer.
Warriors of gold!
Slinger is the same deal. They don't even have like an axe or anything to use, and even if they did, their defense is at 2, which is disgusting. Terrible, terrible, terrible.
Missile warriors!
Galatian skirmishers, same sort of deal. They do have a range of 90, so it's pretty standard. Missile damage 22, so they can all be useful, but like just every other unit that is of these sort of types of units is going to be better than yours. So if they try to counter your slingers with their own slingers, then fat luck to you, mate. You know, you're out of luck. Your skirmishers will get demolished, but that's them. That's the unit cards. I mean, I don't have a problem with these being in the roster, so don't get me saying they're terrible as I could dig at the mod or anything like that. It is what it is. Some factions just have really bad units, and that's okay. They still are useful and can play a role, but you're going to get outclassed by like a butterfly. Yeah, that's it for your skirmishers. Thankfully, you are next to provinces that do have some amazing skirmishers. Like in Greece, you can get Rhodian slingers and what is it called, Cretan archers. So you know, you can get better units. It's just you don't have them in your core roster. Moving on to your, again, massive amount of variety here. I'm just kidding. Galatia obviously does have a very small roster.
Warriors!
We can fit like your whole army easily into one army. I think we have less than 20 men, 20 units in this army actually. This is your Galatian light spear. Now this is where things started to take a little bit of a change of pace, because almost all of the units that we'll see going forward will actually be really, really useful to you. Even this Galatian light spearman unit is actually quite helpful. In sort of the 1.3 era on, we've seen spears get buffs, and they've just overall improved in the DEI mod. And the same thing's absolutely true here. Their main issue is that they don't have a javelin, which is a bit of a shame, and they only have an armor of 8, but their attack of 7 is okay, considering they're like a levy sort of spear. But their defense is all the way at 17. That's monstrous. That's really, really high. So these guys can do really well to like be on the flanks, ready to help support your cavalry. Maybe you want them to like just be a reserve force to plug up holes in your line. They will hold the line for a little while, so they can definitely be useful to you. Don't dissuade them.
Galatians!
We then have Galatians. I know, who would have guessed it? We got the Galatian naked spears. That's right, the real Chads of Galatia right here. They march into battle with almost no armor. They apparently have an armor of 8 somehow. I don't know how, but anyway, we don't want to know where that's coming from. The morale is very high though. 54, which is redonkulous. Is that higher than your general? Yes, it is. So they're more likely to stay in the fight compared to your general. But the stats are just out of this world. An attack of 14 for a spear unit is unheard of. Melee defense of 15, which is still solid. Charge bonus of 29. That's approaching some very low tier cavalry. So a nice charge overall. They even have an armor piercing damage of 6, which isn't too terrible for a spear unit. Bonus first cav and elephants of 19. And they have 4 javelins that they can throw in before they themselves get thrown into the mix. They do only have 200 men, whereas your last spear unit had 300 men. So this isn't necessarily a frontline unit that you want to use to like create a base line for your army, because they will get shredded by skirmishers and javelins coming at them. But these guys will get you some serious kills if you let them get in like a sort of grindy melee fight. They're really, really nice. And it doesn't matter if they go against armor-piercing units because they don't have armor. So everyone will kill them, but these guys are going to take a lot of men with them. So I recommend using them in your army, absolutely.
Ready!
We then have your Galatian Shield Wall Spearmen. Now this is more akin to a frontline unit. These are where you're having a little bit more of a professional sort of setting going on. You do have the shield wall ability, which will increase your defense quite nicely, so that's always good.
All right!
Your stats on their own, though, still very solid, and this is where we finally start to see some armor come into the mix. And we have armor 25, bonus versus elephants and cav of 21, which is really, really nice. Will help you out a lot against your cav heavy enemies, which is basically everyone. Defense is all the way at 19, attack is at 8, which is not great, but it's okay considering these are your spears. And their spear is higher than that of a typical spear. They're not necessarily a pike unit, but they're also not a, like the shorter spear of the naked dudes. Sorry boys, but size does matter. And while your biceps are longer than my feature, these spearmen are just, very, very nice. They outclass them, at least in terms of equipment, right? I mean, you never know, but anyway, that's enough jokes. Just a very nice unit to have as your sort of core mainline front unit.
Spearmen, ready for battle!
Then after the Thurios reforms, you get a Galatian Thurio Spear. Only the one, you don't even get a Thorax Spear unit. However, this is still really all you need, that and the naked unit. Stats all around are pretty solid, very expected of a typical Thurios unit with an armor of 25, so that's really nice too. And they do have a single javelin, armor piercing at 5, combined with regular weapon damage at 22. So they will also get kills in melee combat. Very similar to like Greek Thurio spears, really. No reason to not recruit them in your army once you can finally get it, but that's it for your spears. You got 4 units, enjoy them. But then we move on to your swordsmen. Your swordsman. What do we have to say about them?
Swordman!
Galatian swords, your entry-level sword unit. 300 men with 1 javelin. Base morale is at 42, which isn't that bad, actually, considering it's your entry-level unit. It's quite good. But your melee attack is very high at 13. Defense is at 10, which isn't too terrible. However, your armor is only at 10, so they will still get picked apart, but they can still be quite useful in your battles. They'll soak up enemy fire, while they'll also take a few kills and men with them. Not really too much else to say about them, but yeah, consider using them just for that purpose. Now here, this is your single seriously armor-penetrating unit, your Galatian Axeman. Basically exactly what you would expect. They wield an axe, obviously. So their armor-piercing damage goes all the way up to a whopping 14. That's really, really solid. That's quite nice. This is exactly the kind of unit you're going to need against like the Romans or the elite Seleucid units, for example. It will cut through their armor like butter. You do have a base weapon damage of 19 as well, so that's going to take you all the way up to 33 in total for your weapon damage. Not bad at all. Melee attack is only at 9 though, so you do want to level them up, but because you start out as a chieftain and you're a Gallic faction, they will have a melee attack of 11 when they first begin, when they're first recruited. 11 or 10? I think it would actually be 10. I'm not sure. I think it's a few more XP ranks till you get your second attack buff, but anyway. Charge bonus 28, very nice too. And an armor of 30. That armor of 30 is actually really good and helpful. Only 200 men, but I mean, that's enough.
Infantry!
Then your next sort of mainline sword unit you get access to is your Galatian Chosen Swordsman. These guys are going to be in all of your armies. They absolutely have a serious purpose in your army. However, they're not as specialized as, say, as your legionnaires. They don't have any discipline, really, so, good luck with that. But their stats are just really, really solid. Melee attack of 15 as a starting point. That's great. Melee defense is at 12, which isn't amazing, but it's still pretty friggin' solid. Weapon damage of 32 in total. Armor 35. Base morale of 51. As good as your general's bodyguard. Unfortunately, they do not have a javelin, but I mean, these guys are just really, really good fighters. And so this is the sort of unit that you'll see recruited as a mercenary by like the Hellenic Kingdom and whatnot, you know. That's the sort of infantry unit that they're interested in, and that's exactly why.
Galatians!
However, Galatians, we have your Galatian Legionary unit. Very interesting unit to have in your army. You only get one Legionary unit, as in to say there's no upgrade for it or anything, but I can easily see this being a very good mid to late game core unit for you to use in your roster. One javelin in each of them. They are disciplined, so they have the discipline buff going on. They even have defensive formation, and they have defensive testudo.
Alright!
And then they have the hollow square buff as well. Or buff ability, I should say. Melee attack is slightly lower than the others at 13. Still better than like Principes and whatnot, though, that the Romans field. Melee defense at 12. Total weapon damage at 30. Charge bonus is only at 19, so charging doesn't matter as much. These guys are really professional, really where you're trying to use these abilities to the best of your ability. Armor 38, that is a whopper. That's very, very nice. This really is Galatian Legionnaires to the absolute T. So use them to your best ability.
Melee fighters ready!
Then we have Galatian Thorax Infantry, obviously available after your Thorax reforms. These are your elite swordsmen, the best of the best that you can get. These guys are the men who protect the Pharaoh of Egypt and whatnot, you know? That's the bodyguard units of those kings and pharaohs and everyone. Melee attack is at 15 as a standard. That is monstrous. They do have the defensive formation ability. They have one javelin. Armor 41, which is pretty friggin' high. Base morale 54, so again, high morale in general. Weapon damage total of 32, but very low armor piercing, only of 2. So against armor-based units, these guys will take quite a while to cut through them. But they probably will with their stupidly high attack. Well, not stupid, but you know what I mean? It's just really redonkulous. It's nice. It's good.
Galatian Royal Guard!
We hear you, mate. You're Galatian Royal Guard. And that's it, though, for your swords. You have more swords than spears. 5 swords, 4 spears. So obviously your army is catering to a melee-focused sort of thing going on with your spears and swords. Your skirmishers are basically nowhere to be seen. But spears and swords, you can absolutely base your army off either type. Moving on to your massive selection of cavalry. These are all of the different types of cav you have, really. You got one skirmisher.
Horsemen!
Your Galatian light cavalry. They do have a good speed of 8. But besides that, there's not really too much to say, except their armor piercing is very nice at 12. So keep that in mind. You might even want to use them during a siege or something to cut through an armor heavy unit, but their attack is at 10, defense is only at 8, armor is only at 11, which is very low, and range is only at 80 instead of 90 like infantry based skirmishers. So bit of a shame with missile damage only at 20, but they do have 120 men in their unit, which is good.
No fear!
We then move on to your Galatian medium cavalry. These bad boys have a melee attack of 9, defense of 15, charge 48, weapon damage total of 31, bonus versus infantry 1, cav of 4, armor 18, unfortunately. But the speed of 7 and the base morale of 45 is solid, but it's still relatively basic for you. It's not a great cavalry unit to have, especially considering where the bloody hell you are. You're in Anatolia. Again, surrounded by cavalry heavy factions, they will outclass your cav very, very easily.
Horsemen!
However, besides your general's bodyguard, this is the only other cav that you can recruit. You have a Galatian noble cav unit. Unfortunately, again, only 100 men in this, no javelin. Speed is going down to 6, but that's because your armor is all the way up at 38, which is nice. Base morale 51, just like your general. Melee attack of 13, defense of 12, charge 40, total weapon of 35, and bonus versus infantry of 4. So these guys are going to be really nice at like chasing down enemy units and destroying them quite quickly. If you want to get them stuck at a ground ground out infantry fight against like enemy swords, they'll still do quite well there. Obviously, you've got to take their larger hitbox into account, but it is what it is. Their stats are just great. They kind of remind me of like medieval knights or something, except their armor is nowhere near that of a knight. But these guys are like what you expect to see in a movie. They have a sword, they have a shield, they got some solid armor. That's the sort of thing you see charging, kind of like you know, Riders of Rohan sort of stuff. For all my Lord of the Rings fans out there, shout out to King Theoden in the comments. But yeah,
Galatians!
that's your cav. Unfortunately, 3 units besides your general. You do again have access to more nearby and AOR mercenary sort of things going on, but your core roster is quite lacking when it comes to cav. However, there is one, well, technically 2 special units that we haven't talked about yet. And if you've paid attention to our unit cards, you will have seen them.
Ready
We
for
have chariots.
battle!
Galatia has 2 sets of chariots. Now, whether you consider this a great thing or not really much of a big deal, that's up to you and how you use chariots. I still argue that chariots are still very fragile and not all that great. They can be very useful and they can get you like 1,000+ kills with a single chariot. But Holic, if they can get you 1,000+ kills, then why aren't they good? Because you're only going to get those kinds of kills against the AI. Only the AI is dumb enough to let your chariots have free reign in charging into their back lines. And even then, the AI has improved quite a lot, so maybe not right now. But that's like the only sort of time where they've become helpful and like really, really strong. Now, don't take me too wrong here. Your chariots absolutely can do some serious damage, especially your scythe chariots. Let's just line up our chariots side by side over here. So your lower tier chariot, I'm not even going to bother going over the stats because it doesn't necessarily matter all that much. But your Galatian chariots that you have, these guys are better with like throwing javelins and stuff. They're not really good at running over the enemy. They don't have any scythes on their side. They only have 2 horses pulling their chariot. Their chariot looks like it's made out of bloody bamboo. I mean, it's, you know, wood of some sort, but it's just not... It's not meant for, you know, smashing over Roman legionaries, for example. To be honest, the scythe chariots won't even do that. But you do have 60 men in this single chariot unit, so I can see how it could be nice to try them out. If you're going to get chariots at all, though, you may as well save your money up and get yourself a super heavy Galatian scythe chariot. Scythe meaning you do have scythes on the side. Sides. There you go. God, what a tongue twister. So you have that going on, which is nice. You got 4 horses pulling one of these chariots, so I would expect some, you know, solid strength behind them. I don't know, man. I mean, these guys will throw javelins while they're trying to get stuff done, but there's only one guy on it. You're not going to get all that many kills from that, although it does claim that your ammunition's, what, 16, apparently? Just, yeah, if you're going to get a chariot, get the scythe chariots here, but I just would be very careful about using them, especially in things like online battles and all that. I know this video isn't about that, it's about your campaign situation, so these guys can absolutely do some serious damage against the AI, more so against light infantry, so have them chase down like enemy skirmishers or recharge enemy light swords and spears perhaps. Going into more heavier units, the scythe chariots can get some kills, but you're going to have to cycle through in and out quite a few times. And while you're doing that, you really need to micromanage them. They need like constant attack orders like this, where you're constantly just spamming them, get moving, you know? So it's not like elephants where you can like line up your elephant behind the unit, give it an attack order, and then go away and do like some other orders really quickly. Your chariots, if they're charging into the enemy, you need to keep telling them, go, go, go. You know what I mean? So they need serious micromanagement, and you also need the enemy to basically let you use them heavily. And the money that they cost, it's freaking high. I believe it's like 3,500 for these Galatians, for the scythe chariot, which is seriously hectic. That's very heavy. But anyway, it's up to you if you want to use the chariots or not. I personally would at least try them out, and I do need to do more testing myself with chariots. I've said that for a while now, but yeah, it's not too often you get the chance to use them, so I would at least recommend you give them a try, but keep your expectations low and you really got to put in some serious work if you want them to get the job done. But anyway, that's it for your military for Galatia. Overall, your roster isn't too terrible despite your numbers being limited. A lot of your units are actually really good at killing. It's just you do get outclassed very easily by the major powers around you pretty quickly. And your skirmishers are terrible. That is what it is. But yeah, that's it for your military. Let's move on to the verdict section of this video, where we'll talk about the difficulty rating and just the overall verdict of Galatia. Alrighty everybody, here we are at the verdict section of this video, where we're going to talk a little bit about Galatia, and then we'll do the difficulty rating and then end things off. So if my campaign overview didn't really convey the message, I'll reiterate it very explicitly. This is going to be a very sluggish campaign for you, in my opinion. You'll be constantly the underdog going up against almost all of the other factions around you. There is a couple that you're going to outclass, but they're few and far between, and once you take them out, that's kind of it. You got big powers to deal with after that. And then, not only that, but you'll also be trying to deal with the specific units of these other major powers that do outclass your own. For example, dealing with pikes is going to be a big pain in the butt for you, because you can't take them on frontally. You need to outflank them and hit them from the rear, so to do that, you're going to have to be pretty creative with how you fight your battles. That means you're going to have to try and use ambushes against factions that are coming into your forested mountain region, so maybe consider using the forests and try and use river battles and things like that potentially. But even then, you're going to be forced to attack the enemy head on. But basically, you just can't fight fair. That's the overall thing I want to convey there. The campaign is going to be a big slog. For every battle, you really need to maximize your chance of winning with your pretty limited roster overall. My next point, though, is you're very isolated, so that means everyone will pretty much be killed by you at some point. Basically, it's kind of like the paratrooper's motto, where like if you're a paratrooper, you're supposed to be surrounded, things like that. If you're a Galatian, you're supposed to be surrounded. You really are going to be surrounded by people that don't like you, and the only reason they might start to like you is if you start attacking their enemies very heavily. So maybe, for example, you'll want to befriend like Lydia, because they're quite tough. So attack the people that Lydia is fighting, and then they'll start to like you more. That's when you get traded on aggression, and then you build up a beautiful romantic friendship from there. You get married, live happily ever after, right? But it takes time, it takes quite a bit of work. So you really got to manage your relationship with whatever faction you choose to try and like. Next point, you don't get a chance to make too many mistakes early on. Because you're a one-hitter quitter, and because your low population is so small, you're only at 34,000 people, that's basically about 2 big armies that you can recruit, and then your population's gone. At least from your one city. So do try to get more population as soon as you can, and be mindful of the units you're using and what social class they belong to. You'll want to use basically your peasants of your kingdom and whatever early on, and then as you expand and get over, get more population group and whatnot, try to use your temples, by the way, to help you out with that. Then you'll be able to use more consistent, Galatian sort of core units and not be as worried about population, but it will pretty much always be a concern for you. Next point, use the walls of your capital. You start off with a walled city, the city of Ankara. The walls there are going to be very helpful for you, so you may want to leave like a small army there with like probably half a dozen units or so. Combining that with your garrison, you will be able to defeat the AI pretty easily, and so you can have that army defend your capital while you're out campaigning, taking over their own cities. And then my last thing is try not to rush. You may want to give your neighbors some time to like wipe each other out, or at least to weaken each other. That's when you want to come in and swoop out and take them out. For some other factions, it's actually really viable and really recommended to try and rush as quickly as you can. For example, like say as Macedon maybe. But in this situation, you really just want to sort of pick your time to strike, and you also will want to wait until you can recruit your really good Galatian core units. Once you do that, then you'll have a much easier time getting the ball rolling, in my opinion. You may want to try and rush, it's up to you. That can sort of always work out in your favor, but in my opinion, it's better to just wait those first dozen turns or so, get your core units in your army, and then go out and start using them to outclass your immediate smaller neighbors. But be mindful, you will get outclassed pretty quickly by your other big neighbors, Seleucids, the Egyptians, Armenia, the Greeks to your west and south. They will all give you a serious run for your money. Be creative in how you take them on. But anyway, that's it for tips and everything. My overall last few points. Now, the difficulty rating. Now, this was a tricky one because I actually, not consistently, but most of the time, I found that the Galatian start actually wasn't as hard as what I thought it would be. The neighbors around me, they ended up all attacking each other, so I was able to take my time and take out enemy settlements relatively easily. Problem is holding on to those, and then after you take over your first province, that's when things really get difficult. So considering that, and then considering just how it's going to be a consistent struggle for you throughout this whole campaign, your economy's in a bad position, population sucks, diplomacy sucks, and your military is very limited. There's just so many things that go in the negative against Galatia having a good time, and while your military isn't bad, despite its limited roster, again, I believe you will get outclassed quite quickly, at least in terms of the professionalism of the enemy units you'll be fighting. Like, taking on the pikes of the Seleucids, man, that's a whole other realm compared to like fighting the Cappadocians for a little village. Taking on the Seleucids, you're taking on some serious chunky boys, you know. That's really, really tough stuff. And even after you beat the Seleucids, you got Parthia and Bactria and Moria. All of these big factions have perfect counters to your armies. The Parthians will run laps around you with their horse archers. Again, you can abuse AI to deal with that, but while you're doing that, you're still going to lose like 100 men per unit or whatever while you're chasing down them horse archers. So anyway, considering just the mountain slide of negative points that I have to say about your Galatian campaign in terms of difficulty, I got to come in this heavy, and I got to come in and give this a very hard difficulty rating of 8 out of 10. This is a very hard campaign in my opinion, at least for a typical average DEI player. Normal difficulty does help us out, which is why it's not a 9 or a 10 out of 10. But yeah, if you start playing on like very hard difficulty rating, good luck. If you're playing on hard, it's going to be a bit tougher, but I think you're still floating around 8 out of 10 territory. Playing on normal, I could see how it could be argued to go down to like a 7 out of 10, but it really just depends on your experience. If you're really good at battles, then you'll probably do pretty well as Galatia, because they rely so heavily on doing well in their battles, in not losing too many men, and being creative with how you ambush the enemy and deal with their armies. But I mean, eventually you can't ambush every single enemy, you know. You are going to have to assault cities from the front. You are going to have to attack pikes from the front as well. It's just inevitable. So considering all of that, I'm going to come in with heavy rating of 8 out of 10, very hard difficulty. Very fun campaign though. I can see this being a lot of fun, and you can play the campaign in a lot of different ways, which is something I really, really like. I like the new update to Galatia, even though the roster is quite limited. You can still make up for that in various ways, and it just makes the faction feel very unique and flavorful in my opinion. So anyway, ladies and gentlemen, let me know what you all think of Galatia down in the comments below. And of course, please do comment on what sort of faction you would like to see overviewed next. So until then, everybody, thank you all so much for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I shall see you in the next one.